What is the better art form, painting or sculpture? The comparison of the superiority of various art forms has been going on for centuries, and the Italians have a nice word for this: Paragone. This word simply means comparison and can refer to a bunch of art-related discussions, like whether poetry is a better or more prestigious art form than painting. Or the 16th century discussion between the artists from Venice and Florence, whether the Disegno school, which emphasized the importance of accurate drawings and designs in painting, was a better way of painting, or whether colorito was better, referring to the Venetian specialty and emphasis on using the best colors to capture life and express emotions. But more than these examples, the term paragone usually refers to the comparison between sculpture and painting. Both have their pros and cons, and both have inspired each other to develop these disciplines further. The discussion between painters and sculptors first became popular during the Renaissance. At least that's the first time this discussion was properly documented. The reason was that the artists from the Renaissance were inspired by the classical art form from ancient Greece and Rome, and most of the art that survived from that time were sculptures. And this immediately provided the first argument in favor of sculpting. Those works were much more durable and were more likely to survive in good condition over time. It also meant that the artists getting inspiration from classical works were getting their inspiration from statues and relief carvings. So sculpture stood at the basis of the art that was created during the Renaissance. Another big argument in favor of sculpting was that a major disadvantage of painting is that you can view the scene only from a single point of view. A painting is a two-dimensional object, and you cannot walk around it to admire a scene from different perspectives. But with a sculpture, you can walk around it, just like you do in real life. If you want to admire the David by Michelangelo, you can admire his muscular body from every angle. In other words, sculptures provided a true three-dimensional imitation of the real world, and did not only provide the illusion of three-dimensionality as painting does. Michelangelo said it as follows: "Painting is only good insofar it imitates the three-dimensional qualities of sculpture." And a bit later, the Italian goldsmith and sculptor Benvenuto Cellini took his one step further. He wrote that the reason that Michelangelo was considered the best painter ever was because he understood sculpting better than any other painter. Let me provide an example of the unique results that sculptures can provide. This statue from 1582 by Gian Bologna shows the abduction of the Sabine woman. It shows three figures in a dramatic composition, and it was carved from a single block of marble. Surely something completely different than capturing the same scene using a paintbrush. Early in the 15th century, the arguments in favor of the superiority of painting over sculpture were more abundant and convincing. The most obvious argument was that painting provided the ability to add color and so resemble that element of reality better. Another major argument was that when one wanted to imitate the real world in an artwork, the painting was a better medium. For example, if you want to capture a landscape that you can see out of a window, certainly painting can approximate that view better than a set of sculptures. In order to capture the view as realistically as possible, the painter had to understand the laws of perspective, which were actually developed right around that time. And painting was considered a much better way to capture complex scenes. Imagine that you wanted to portray a battle, like the Italian artist Paolo Uccello did in the middle of the 15th century. Even if you would sculpt 10 horses and 20 soldiers, you would only have part of the scene and no landscape and other props. But a painting could efficiently mimic the real-life view. And what helped the argument in favor of painting at that time was that complex scenes were considered to be higher in the ranking of art. Another argument in favor of painting was that the use of color had more potential to capture a variety of surfaces as realistic as possible. A somewhat contradictory example is this statue from 1722 by Antonio Corradini of a veiled lady. It's an incredible achievement to create the illusion of a transparent view from a block of marble, as he did. But if you would think about how to capture a transparent view in an artwork, you would probably not select marble as your first medium. Instead, you could use a softer and more transparent material. Now, painting has the ability to capture with various mixtures of paint a wide variety of materials in a pretty convincing way. Look, for example, at this work called A Fair Reflection from 1915 by John William Godward, which captures the solidity and strength of various types of marble in a convincing way. But at the same time, the same brush was able to capture the softness of the flesh of the skin, the materials of her dress, the glass mirror, etc. Yet one more argument in favor of painting over sculpture was expressed by several writers, including Leonardo da Vinci, and that related not so much what both art forms could achieve, but what skills and abilities were necessary to create a great artwork. Painting required much more mental ability, while sculpting needed physical strength and technical skill. And mental ability was considered a more noble skill than strength and technique, which was just a skill that a craftsman possessed, not a true artist. It is interesting to consider this quote from a man who knew both how to paint and sculpt better than most other people, and that is Michelangelo, who said the following about sculpting. "Beauty is the purgation of superfluities. The sculpture is already complete within the marble block before I start my work. It is already there. I just have to chisel away the superfluous material." You can interpret this as that the sculptor just needed the physical strength and technical ability to get the desired sculpture. In some way, that was considered similar to a craftsman like a carpenter who needed his strength and technical skill to create a piece of furniture. And a carpenter was a much less respected profession than a true artist like a painter or poet. Although, to be fair, Michelangelo actively sketched his sculptures before uncovering them from the marble, so Michelangelo did believe in the power of drawing both for paintings and sculptures. The discussion on whether painting or sculpture was a superior type of art did inspire both camps to improve the limitations of their medium with creative solutions. An obvious example is that if painting can only include a single perspective of a scene, that one can include one or more mirrors to multiply the number of perspectives. An early example of that is the Arnolfini portrait from 1434 by Jan van Eyck. He shows a couple getting married, but the mirror on the wall provides a little glimpse of the painter and probably a witness to the marriage. And like that, you can add an additional mirror as well. In 1529, Giovanni Safoldo made this portrait of a warrior with a mirror on the left and the right showing some additional viewpoints of the sitter in front of him. Another interesting development in painting was that some painters tried to imitate sculptures as close as possible with the paintbrush, a technique known as grisaille. Look, for example, at these two figures painted by Jan van Eyck that are part of the famous Ghent altarpiece. Van Eyck created the illusion that these are really sculptures, which becomes especially convincing when seen from a larger distance. It was a way of painters to say that a painting could pretty closely resemble a sculpture, but not the other way around. Of course, the grisaille could not provide true three-dimensionality, but nevertheless it comes somewhat close to a sculpture. On the flip side, sculptors would argue that you can also just put some color on a sculpture to make things look more naturalistic. In fact, that is what the ancient Greeks and Egyptians already did, though those colors had mostly faded or disappeared over time. And that comes back to their argument that sculptures were just a more lasting and durable form of art. Of course, over time the qualities of the paint and their preservation techniques have improved significantly, such that this advantage of sculptures has largely disappeared. Well, I hope you enjoyed the discussion of Paragone, in this case referring to the superiority of either sculpting or painting. I personally think that one is not superior over the other, but that this discussion has benefited the development of both art forms over time. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are about these different art forms. Feel free to leave a comment in the discussion section down below. And finally, leave a like and subscribe if you want to support the channel. Thanks for watching.